Thanks for tuning in to this episode of I Have Something to Say, where subject matter experts are unafraid and unapologetic about sharing their perspectives regarding issues that impact our lives. They speak up because basically they give a shit. So if you're tired of canned answers and want to finally hear real people cut through the BS and talk about real issues, this is the podcast for you. I'm your host, Sami Heyman Marrero from Urbander, and behind our mixer is our producer, Chris Majoka from UdoU. Good morning, everyone, and I'm excited to have you here tuning in to I Have Something to Say and introducing our guests for today. I'm just so excited because we've been participating in several spaces addressing this very topic, which is about generating wealth in minority communities. And I want to welcome Dr. LaTanya White, who's the founder and principal consultant for Concept Creative Group, and did her dissertation on dynastic wealth. Welcome, LaTanya. How are you?
Oh, Sammy, I am so thrilled. Oh my God, I can't even, my heart is full, my heart is bursting. So thank you for having me. Please,
Oh,
thank you so
yes, absolutely. It's so funny because we're on these calls, right? And as we're participating in real time, then we're
much.
having like these side conversations. I'm like, oh my goodness, what you just said. It's so amazing. And so it's been a while that I've been wanting to have this conversation with you because I feel it's going to be a clear roadmap of how do we get there, right? And so let's start by I just want to ask you
Yeah.
why, why did you choose this subject to focus on? Tell me a little bit about your background, about um why you founded, right, your practice, and the topic of dynastic wealth and why you're so passionate about it, and are kind of like the subject matter expert on it too.
Thank you for that opportunity. And interestingly enough, this journey started for me on my 13th birthday. My mom used to work at the post office. I grew up in Miami, Florida, and my mom worked at the main post office. My birthday is it's 8 days after Christmas. So my birthday is January 2nd, and that's still, well, pre Amazon. That time was still very, very busy for the post office with packages and mail. And so on my 13th birthday, I spent most of the day by myself because my mom was at work. And I remember saying that I would never, want to be in a position where I had to choose work over the experiences that I could create for my family with my children. And so that was this dormant idea. Like I didn't know I was saying to myself I wanted to be an entrepreneur, that I wanted to have this control over when and where I showed up in the world, but certainly my path and my lived experience took me down that journey.
Mhm.
And I had started a bartending business where it's 71 proof, right? So we provide bartender staffing, bartender training, and we do custom cocktail development. And because of some of the clients that I had in the Tallahassee area, the professor who was teaching entrepreneurship at my alma mater, which is Florida A&M University, asked if I would be a guest speaker in the entrepreneurship course. This was back in 2010. And I
Yeah.
was sure, I'd love to share my story. And from the feedback that the students took up the chain, from the professor to the department chair to the dean, I was asked if I'd be interested in teaching the course myself. And so in true entrepreneur fashion, I was like, well, I will figure it out as I go. Right. Right.
Yes. No, no is not an option, right? It's like, yes, that's part of the freedom, right? To be able
Yes.
to say yes to the opportunities you're interested in pursuing. That's awesome.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. And so that was 2010, but 2 years later, I became so disconnected from the entrepreneurship ecosystem. I was really active on different boards in the community, but because my teaching load got
Mhm.
higher, I was asked to respectfully step down from my position because I just wasn't able to do both jobs well. And though at the same time, I felt that I wasn't creating enough impact with my
Mhm.
students, I wasn't driving home this idea that, hey, I can be an entrepreneur, I can take control over what success looks like for me and for my family. And as I felt those walls kind of closing in on me, and at the same time, I was being removed from these positions and these opportunities to be of impact in the community. And I said, I got to do better. I have to find a way to be a better educator and to be a better entrepreneur so that I can, getting back to this idea of having freedom. And
Mhm.
I applied for a social entrepreneurship accelerator program that was being hosted in Bali, Indonesia. And so,
Wow. That's
yes,
awesome.
thank you. And I went out on the limb. I was
Mhm.
like, because I had looked around, what are the opportunities? There was, of course, the Entrepreneurial Learning Institute. Kaufman was doing something. There were all these programs, but it was going to take me, close to a year to
Mhm.
really develop that mastery that I wanted. Because ultimately, I wanted to be able to inspire my students to desire to seek out the entrepreneurial journey. And so the program in Bali was 30 days.
Yeah.
We were covering business model generation and all these high level topics that it was going to take me close to a year to really master if I stayed with programs here in the States.
And can I
So,
ask you something?
yeah.
Because this is one of my, I'll call it a pet peeve, right? Is that you
Mhm,
walk into these and I don't want to knock any programs or ESOs, or I'm just saying that there's something to, I think you know where I'm going with this, because we've kind of touched upon this, right? In some of these spaces that we've been meeting in. Um and it's there's this separation between theory and practice.
mhm,
And
mhm,
sometimes it's great to know the concepts and to know, but there's nothing like hands on lived
mhm,
experiences where you learn and apply and you learn and apply. And many times in these business ecosystems, that's what's missing. It's very
mhm.
disjointed because you don't get that. And so was the experience in Bali like that? Was it learn and apply?
Sammy, it was the most impactful experience that I had, prior to writing my dissertation. Because the idea was, when you apply to the program, you were really saying, I am a social entrepreneur and I have an idea and I'm committed to being immersed in this learning experience so that I can launch in 30 days. Like you
Mhm.
went in to the program with the commitment that you were going to apply what you've learned and execute in
Wow,
a 30-day period.
that's crazy. That's
Yeah.
crazy talk right there. That's crazy. That's crazy.
But
But
but but
but
this is
I like crazy. So yes, I
yeah,
feel like I'm in good company right now.
yes. And so the thing that really that would this is what changed my life. So there
Mhm.
were 16 of us. It was a mixed bag. There was
Mhm.
one white male. He was from Quebec.
Mhm.
There was a white female from Australia. Um, the rest of the group were minorities. So they lived in Singapore, they were native Indonesians, and then there were two African American women, no black men. Sammy, the white male, was
Mhm.
the first one to execute. The
Really?
yes. Yes.
Mm. Not
The
surprised.
exactly. And that's when the light kind of switched for me. I was like, how am I having the exact same experience? 13,000 miles away from everybody I know. I am literally living in a parallel universe. And that's when, this pathway to empowerment and freedom, because what I learned from that experience is that people who come from historically oppressed backgrounds, no matter where you are in the world, often are the last to execute. We have the lowest tolerance for risk. And that was showing up
Mhm.
every day in how I engage with my students, how I engage with clients. And that was the impetus for me to pursue the research that I did in wealth transfer in the
Wow.
racial wealth gap.
Wow, that's fascinating. So being able to leave, right, the context of the US, go
Mhm.
into another country, interact with people from other countries, right? In this it was like a petri dish. I could imagine it was, right? But
Yes.
you came to this conclusion that it doesn't matter where you are in the world, it's about oppression and how that
Mhm.
really um actually can trigger, right, or not, the outcomes, or the, how do you say, the timeline of
Mhm.
certain
Mhm.
decisions, and the results of whatever you put into, in this case, entrepreneurship. Wow, that's that's
Yeah.
really, yeah, that's a big aha moment. So then you
Mhm.
decided to do your dissertation
Yes.
on dynastic wealth. I mean, talk to us about what is dynastic wealth. I know it is because I you know
Yes.
poked around and read about, I read your work. But
Thank you.
yeah, please share with us what is dynastic wealth and how do families attain dynastic wealth.
Sure. So what I actually love to share is I was looking at entrepreneurship and its impact on wealth creation
Mm,
because we talk so much about, especially for minority communities and minority families. Okay, if you just get more education, you get another degree, you'll get the job that's going to change the game for you and your family. That's not happening across the board. Okay. Well, maybe it's you get the job and you save up enough for a down payment and you buy a house, and that's going to change the game economically for your family. And we're still not seeing the needle moving. So I venture to say that entrepreneurship has to be the last thing that we just have not tried as a minority group at scale to change the economic narrative. And so that was the lens that I went
mhm.
through as I was determining where the research would take me. Like I had to relinquish control and let the research really lead me. And I landed at a report that talked about the title was The Billionaire Bonanza, and
Mhm.
it talked about these dynastic families. And I said, well, this is an interesting concept. But as I'm reading through it, I'm like, oh, we know these. We know the Rockefeller family. We know the Walton family. We know what dynastic families are. And
Yeah.
by definition, a family reaches dynastic status when either the wealth that they've built or the business that they've established has been in the family's control for 3 consecutive generations. And
Mm.
so, mhm. And so I had to make the distinction because the Rockefeller family hasn't had a core business since 1911. But when John D. Rockefeller established Standard Oil in 1901 and they went through the antitrust lawsuit, when that business broke up, that wealth was so tightly protected that it's been passed down for 7 consecutive generations. And so certainly that's a dynastic family, right?
Yes.
But and I really wanted to study, where are the black family dynasties? Because I love to tell this story. We don't hear this story enough. There were so few
Mhm.
black dynastic families that the sample population would not even it wouldn't be enough for me to do my dissertation on.
Wow.
Yeah. And I had
And
to okay, go ahead, go ahead.
but I'm sure you weren't surprised though, right? Because
Yeah.
having had the experience about,
Mhm.
right, moving or
Mhm.
acting on input regarding business
Right. Right.
slowly, more because we're again not prone to take risk, right?
Mhm.
Well,
Mhm.
and so yeah, that makes sense. And so I for one totally agree that entrepreneurship is the solution, right? I'll
Yes.
just state it, right? Because like you, it's I've been able to experience freedom.
Mhm.
Freedom not only financially, but also freedom of just showing up where I want to show up and to
Mhm.
saying what I want to say, right? Within, of course, certain parameters, right? Because you don't want to also antagonize and all of that. Well, sometimes you do, but that's a whole other show, right? But where I'm getting at is that there is promise, right? Like
Mhm.
I see promise and I see direction, and it's a new roadmap. It's a new roadmap for my family, even, right?
Yes.
And so, and I'm sure you feel that too. And so when we started talking and I learned about that you did this work and you focused on the beauty industry, right? I
Mhm.
know that
Yes.
you had to be very granular and
Yes.
and to try to find that space where you could tell that story and find more how to say a sample, a better sample, right? Is that why you chose, is that why you chose the beauty industry?
Yes. So, I chose the beauty industry because there was prior research that had shown that the beauty industry historically was a field where Black women could experience economic mobility. There was no other research at the time that said this is an industry that Black
Mhm.
families and Black entrepreneurs can experience social mobility. So I was like, okay, we'll just use this.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, it makes sense, right? So
Yeah.
yes, so and I could totally see that too.
Yeah.
I see the parallels too with
Mhm.
with the Latino community, right? Like yeah, which is we'll talk about that in a minute because now I'm like dying to know, right? In terms of your findings and outcomes, if you ventured into seeking, right? Some or seeing or noticing some of the parallels with
Yes.
other right ethnic communities. But yeah, so then where did you, so what was that process?
Yeah.
What is that blueprint? What
Yeah.
does it look like? Mm-hmm.
Yes. So, and that's such a great question. Thank you for asking. What I found, right? So, yes, I understood through my own experience as an educator, as an analyst, as an advisor, I understood the risk tolerance aspect. But what was surprising to me, Sammy, were the systemic barriers that people know about redlining and how these other barriers to Black wealth that were historically put into place, but we hadn't made a connection between why my grandfather, who was a World War II veteran, who was discriminated against. He couldn't get GI Bill, um, benefits and things of that nature. And the GI Bill created America's middle class. The
Yeah.
GI Bill allowed for veterans to get access to low interest rate mortgage loans, right? But no one talks about how, because my grandfather was locked out of that, or my father may have been locked out of that, how that affects my entrepreneurial journey.
Mm-hmm.
And so those were some of the other components that I talked about in how legalized segregation impacts how Black women ended up in the beauty industry, or how Latina women ended up in hair and salon industry because of racism and sexism. So there is this concept that's referred to as the racial enclaves. So if you look at, historically pre dot com and all of those things, most of the time, Black men were either in barbering or music. Black women were in the beauty industry. Asian men were in like grocery stores,
Mhm,
Asian women in nail salons. And so the research just shows because we have been marginalized, we've literally been squeezed into these certain industries. Now that is where most of our businesses over index, right?
mhm, mhm,
So that's kind of what that historical context provided. And so as I'm looking at, well, how did the Rockefellers do this? What was the steps that they took? What was the blueprint? And I had to make sure that I accounted for the lived experience of Black entrepreneurs from the 1940s before
mhm,
I could say, okay, this is what we do, right? Because
mhm,
it's just not going to work that way. There have been barriers that have been put in place that will not allow marginalized families and communities to do exactly what we see the broader population doing. And so that was what my research really said. We have to contextualize the blueprint
mhm.
for people who have lived in the margins for centuries. We have to do that.
Yes. Wow. So I mean, I'm just like, wow. Because so then all of these, when you see all of these business owners, right, in our communities,
Mhm.
it's not by preference. It's because
Mhm.
there's no other option really because
Ex
of the barriers that I just had like this major breakthrough.
Yes.
That's why. So it's by design,
Yes.
basically, that they're stuck into house cleaning,
Mhm.
into all of these different entrepreneurial settings, right? Yeah.
Yes.
But and still the opportunities to expand is very limited. It's very closed in. So, you
Yes.
know what? Now I feel so guilty. You know why? Because sometimes I talk to like people in the community or I get to speak, I get invited local entrepreneur groups or ESOs or whatever, right? As a panelist or whatever. And sometimes I say we need to look outside of what's familiar to us, right? So if you're in Latino community, you can expand to a broader community, but it's just that they can't.
Yeah.
I just,
Oh, yes.
and so I feel guilty because here I
No,
am, right?
no,
Trying to offer up, yeah, this
no.
idea of like you can grow what you're doing, but
Mhm.
not necessarily so. So what are these barriers, and what does it take to create dynastic wealth, or what does that look like, for example, in white families, for
Yeah.
example, the
Yeah.
Rockefeller, what does that look right
Yeah.
like?
Oh,
And then what are the barriers that
yeah.
prevents us from reaching that? Because then that's the solution, right?
Mhm.
And I'm
Mhm.
sure that that's what you focused on.
Yes. So first I gotta say, please don't feel guilty. This is an opportunity, right? It's a learning opportunity and it's a global teachable moment.
Hmm.
So to that point about looking outside and let's doing something different from what's been familiar. One of the constructs of dynastic wealth, and of course I'll unpack this, is the relational wealth. It's the social capital. So now that they are connected to you, they can now see that maybe I can, because it's hard to get outside of the familiar if there's no one in your network, if there's no one that you have a trusted relationship with,
Hmm.
um, and even more importantly, no one that you feel psychologically safe with, right? Because we might have these networks, but maybe we're always on the defense. We
Yeah.
always, do you really have my best interest at heart? But
Hmm.
Sammy, they know that about you, that you have their best interest at heart. So they can trust your advice to look outside of the familiar. Now they have the opportunity to think and to imagine and to vision something that hadn't previously been planted in them before. So hats off to you for that. Okay.
Okay. Okay, thank you. You got me off the ledge because I was feeling really guilty. It's like, what have I done?
Yeah. It's okay, it's okay. So
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 what
there's
are those indicators? What does dynastic wealth,
Mhm,
in white
mhm.
communities look like?
Okay. So this is the thing that I love talking about because most people think that generational wealth is really going to be the game changer for black and minority families and communities. But the truth is that's not what wealthy white families are focused on. They are not thinking about generational wealth because if you do a quick Google search on what is generational wealth, it'll talk about one form of wealth. It'll talk about the financial assets, which, we need financial assets to build a dynasty. Wealthy white families are looking at least 3 generations at one time. They build their businesses to account for their grandchildren. So,
Mm.
again, as I shared, to reach dynastic status, the wealth has to be controlled, or the business needs to be controlled within the family for 3 consecutive generations. And so, while we're talking a lot about generational wealth, that's literally from me to my daughter. That's
Mhm.
one generation. And I
Yes.
stop short of ensuring that her children don't have to start from scratch, because what's been found is that if the next generation is not involved in, well, how did you do that, mommy? How did you start that business? How did you make that money? And what do I need to do to protect it? And can you teach me how to make my own money? If she and I aren't having those conversations, she's going to blow it all, right?
Mm.
Because she feels entitled to it. And then her children are starting from scratch. And so then every generation is starting from scratch. But
Yes.
with dynastic wealth, the way that you plan for and strategize to have these 3 generations accounted for, for
Mhm.
lack of a better term, in the way that you operate the business, it really looks at the family. So it's not just, who am I as the entrepreneur? What is this contract going to bring in for me today? What's our bottom line going to be like at the end of this tax year? It is really looking at, who do I have around me? Who
Mhm.
is within the family? And it may not be your blood relatives. Like, that's something that we have to be open to. Who is in my brain trust that is going to be on this journey with me, that can help me really define what I want my family identity to be? And so
Mm.
that's the second form of wealth. There are 5 forms of wealth that dynastic families cultivate. They aren't just focused on financial assets, they're looking at 5 different forms
Okay,
of wealth.
I'm ready. Give it to me, Latanya, because I'm gonna write this down.
Okay. So naturally, we have our financial wealth that, of course, comes from strategic marketing and strategic pricing and profitability. Cannot build a dynasty without financial wealth.
Right.
But next form, spiritual wealth, that is really what separates generational wealth from building an entrepreneurial dynasty. And so spiritual wealth is, what is the core identity of the family? What do you want people, and you what do you want your descendants 3 and 5 and 7 generations from now to know about who you were as the visionary member of this family? So spiritual identity is establishing your family identity. What do we want to be known for? What
Oh
are our
my God, that is so deep. I just got emotional with that. That's
yes.
awesome.
And
Okay.
and so the challenge, though, and I've experienced this with my own family and with other family, with other colleagues, Black entrepreneurs, the challenge with minority families and families that come from historically oppressed backgrounds is, we have to account for the trauma
Mm.
that our grandparents and our parents have been through, because they may not be open to having discussions about it. I don't want to talk about when I'm not here. We don't talk about death. We don't talk about death in this family. What are you doing? So we have
Right.
to be prepared to, for the resistance
Hmm.
around what do you want to happen when you're not here? Because minority families, we do not talk about death and we do not talk about money, right? And so being able to account for the resistance in that. But and what I'll share is I was met with that own resistance at the beginning of this journey with my own family. But I looked at my daughter, she was, 5 or 6 years old at the time, and I said, well, Sparrow, it's gonna be me and you. And she didn't know what I was talking about. But I have a responsibility not to just to her, but to her future. And so I had to be responsible for building what I wanted that identity to be, even if nobody else came along with me. But I guess I was on my soapbox for long enough that my family did eventually join the
Come
conversation.
around. Yes.
So we've been working on establishing our family identity, our spiritual wealth, and that has informed and helped us to record this wealth of knowledge that exists within our family. There's so much rich lived experience, and not just my mom and my grandmother, but my cousins, my sister. No one's age has any it doesn't take away from how rich your experience can be and how that contributes to the value that is housed within this family. So we record the wealth of knowledge through, oral history, sitting down and talking with them about what were some of the things that you think defined your character. And how do we use that knowledge and that insight to teach your niece or your children about who they come from? Because
Mhm.
the deal here with recording the wealth of knowledge is making sure that future generations know who they are before the world tries to tell them who they are. And so it's this really holistic, warm
Yeah.
and fuzzy approach to building a dynasty. It's
Wow.
not just about how much money, what profit margin did I add to that product or to that service. It's really about how is this going to impact what people say about me when I'm not here. So
Wow.
financial wealth,
Wow. Yeah.
um, financial wealth, spiritual wealth, the wealth of knowledge, and then we get into intellectual wealth. What we do, and this is probably the most empowering thing that you can do in your family, is say, now that we have this family trust, because you certainly want to work with a legal professional to establish your family trust so that you're building wealth assets within the estate. But now
Hmm.
that we have this family trust and we know about your lived experience, and I didn't know you were so passionate about working with your hands. That's why you're always doing stuff around the house. As a family, we're going to invest in your intellectual wealth and we're going to, maybe send you to get your general contractor's certificate. We're
Hmm.
going to invest in you developing mastery in a skill or in some knowledge that we know ultimately is going to create more wealth for this family.
Right.
Yeah. And
That's
so,
awesome. Yeah. So intellectual wealth is investing in the newer generations, right? To be able to take over and to
mhm,
groom them, if you will,
mhm,
and coach
mhm,
them in that process. I love that. Can I tell you something? So I had this experience this past summer. I was talking with my husband in the kitchen, and our family room is right next door. My daughter was, I thought, watching TV. I thought she's 12, and like you with your daughter, right? We talk and business and stuff, and so
mhm.
she knows what we do and all of that, especially with COVID, because they've been stuck with us for 2 years. So they're yeah. And so I was telling my husband, I'm gonna be 52 this year. And I'm like, you know what? I don't know this work thing, right? It's
Mhm,
like it would be awesome if we can blow this up and really grow and scale our business. So in 10 years, right, we can take a step back and maybe sell the business. Or and I was just having this informal conversation with him, and all of a sudden I hear my daughter say, but what about me? And I look and I say, what are you talking, who's talking to you, right? And she tells me, well, no, when you guys are done with urbander, then I'll be in 10 years, I'll be 22, I can take over. And I was like, oh my God, did she just say that? And then she goes on to ask me, what does she need to study to? So she was already ahead of me, right? So you're telling me this now, and now I know what to call it, right? It's
Mhm,
intellectual wealth. That would be
mhm,
so she asked me, what do I need to study to be prepared to take over? So
mhm.
I thought, now I'm hearing you speak and I'm like connecting all these dots, and that she's thinking about dynastic wealth, where I was like, okay, I'm just like ready to just move on and enjoy, right? A little bit of free time,
Yes.
if you will,
Yeah.
in my 60s. But anyway, so this goes to what you're talking about right now.
Mhm, mhm. And that's so amazing. That is so amazing. So one thing that you said, you talked about the next generation.
Yeah.
And there's a book, it's titled Complete Family Wealth. James Hughes is the primary author. But instead of, they actually write about this. They say instead of referring to the next generation, they use this term rising generation, because the idea is that we are putting the onus and the responsibility to move the family forward on anybody, right? So
Mm.
even your first cousins, your sisters and brothers, you can invest in intellectual wealth in any of them, not just
Mm.
your daughter, your nieces, your nephews. It can be anybody in the family who's going to be committed to moving this family forward and building the dynasty. So rising generation versus next generation.
I love that. Okay, thank you. Thank you for that gem. Yes, and you just made me think about my niece who's studying law. Anyway, I
Yeah.
there are a lot of conversations to be made in my family.
Yes.
Apparently, yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
And
That's right,
so,
because that's the thing. Sometimes we oversee the
mhm.
talent and the resources that we have, like literally a phone call away, right?
Yeah. Yes. Yes, Sam. And so I'm literally getting goosebumps because I just see there's so much opportunity for our families. Like, we don't have to wait. We actually don't even have time. We don't have time
Yes, yes.
to wait.
I,
Like,
mhm,
the time is now to
mhm.
start, having these conversations. Um and especially as we think about this last form of wealth. So the fifth
Yes,
form of wealth.
I just wrote number 5, circle, because I'm waiting.
Yes. That fifth form of wealth is the relational wealth. So we think about social capital, right? There, especially in career development, the conversation has moved from, well, you need a mentor at work. Well, now they're talking about you actually need a sponsor at work, right? But
Mm.
so what happens with that is, yeah, they'll open the door, they'll make the introductions, but do they know your capacity to build relationships? They need you to take them with you as you're in these spaces, as you're advocating, as you're doing the work, and as you're building your own social capital. So
Mhm.
relational wealth is bringing them with you so that you can transfer your social capital and empower your niece, empower your daughter to build her own relationships, right? Because she has her own identity. And
Yeah.
the dynasty can't sustain off of your relationship with the decision maker, especially once control is transferred to your daughter. Your daughter needs to have her own relationships with your network, with other decision makers, so that she can walk into her own, right? So that
Yes.
her own social capital, but with the understanding that it's because of the relational wealth that you had, and that you're transferring that wealth to her as well.
Wow, that's incredible. Oh my goodness. And the thing is, if we're growing together, because we've been in these spaces with fellow entrepreneurs, black and brown entrepreneurs, that we're trying to create these coalitions and really work together, lean in on each other, do that peer-to-peer mentorship. So then, for example, how old is your daughter now?
She's 7.
Okay, so there you go, right? So right now, mine is 12 and
Mhm.
your daughter's 7,
Mhm.
right? And so right
Mhm.
now you see that age gap, but when they're in their 20s and
Yeah.
30s, it's not going to matter, right? It's all in the same, right?
Right.
Right? Exactly. But imagine that if you and I, right,
Yeah.
are
Yeah.
on this track now to
Yeah.
build dynastic wealth.
Yes.
As the
Yes.
years go by, our
Mhm.
relational wealth, right?
Mhm.
Correct.
Mhm.
Stop me
Got it.
stop
Got
me
it.
when I'm getting it wrong, because I'm just trying to process this, right? Our relational wealth, right? Because we're building, and then my circle is your circle,
Exactly.
right? And then that's how we grow our relational wealth, right? And
Mhm.
it's founded on trust, on
Mhm.
mutual respect, on celebrating
Yeah.
successes together, right?
Yes.
And then
Mhm.
as we grow, my daughter will know, oh no, I'm working with Latanya, I'm working with Latanya, this and that. And then all of a sudden, as they become older, we'll bump into each other
Mhm.
with our kids, and then they
Mhm.
start developing relationships amongst themselves. And that's what we're talking about.
Exactly.
Correct? Okay.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. Yes.
Good. Good.
Yes.
I'm excited. I'm so excited right now. Right.
We will
And
see. You're
and do you think that in the last 2 years, with so many women, okay, leaving the workforce,
right.
and people just in general, I don't want to, just think, do this gender thing, right? But a lot of women really have left the workforce, let's just face it, okay, and chosen entrepreneurship as a viable option to put food on the table. Do you think that we're going to see, because I've seen more interaction, right,
Mhm.
in the last 2 years since COVID. Zoom has been amazing in connecting us, and, and
Absolutely.
and saying, hey, I see you, yes, I hear you. It's like sometimes it's like, oh my god, it's like listening to myself many times when we're in these spaces, and it's
Mhm.
wonderful. And do you feel that we're getting there, like that we're really pushing through and in navigating, right, this new roadmap, and achieving something? Do you see it as something that's feasible?
I absolutely do. I absolutely do because it's like, well, I've been waiting for everybody. What is it's
Yeah.
like, why did it take a pandemic for this to happen? But
Wow.
I'm glad, right? Because it just speaks so highly to this. It's like we've been walking around with uh with these scales
Hmm.
over our eyes, just kind of going through the motions, not even like being so disconnected from what makes you feel alive.
Hmm.
I hadn't even missed it until now. And so now, with the great resignation and everything like that, I think people are so much more committed to one, to their peace of mind, and two, to living an authentic and high vibrational life that there are so many people that are literally like, nothing can stop me. I will not let anything stop me from maintaining this high energy, from feeling so alive. I absolutely think that we're there.
Yeah, and I feel it too. And do you feel, so what are some of these barriers,
Yeah.
okay? Because now let's just do this,
Yes.
right? So, and we've had some of these
Mhm.
conversations too offline. What are
Mhm.
some of the barriers that prevent us from reaching? We're not going to talk about the financial, because we know what that is, right? It's
Yes.
lack of opportunity,
Yeah.
procurement, access to loans, all of that, right?
Mhm.
So we know that. But the spiritual wealth, the
Mhm.
the wealth of knowledge is, many of us are first generation
Yeah.
college graduates, right? So that we understand, and it's very tangible, so we know how to invest in that. But I'm
Mhm.
I'm talking about financial wealth, I'm sorry, the spiritual wealth, the intellectual wealth, and the relational wealth. What
Yeah.
are some of the barriers that you feel that we need to
Mhm.
break break to be able to attain those and the others too, right? In your opinion.
Yes, for sure. So, um, as I was studying the Black entrepreneurial experience, there was a book that kind of like resurfaced. I have it on my shelves, I have it in my Kindle, right? But it
Mhm.
resurfaced, especially getting to the spiritual wealth part. The title of the book is Post Traumatic Slave Syndrome. And so, what I want to kind of go back to my experience in Bali. We were day 26 in this 30-day program, and I
Mhm.
had developed like a really close relationship with one of the participants, and she's native Indonesian. She has a background as like a website designer, a UX designer, like just ahead of her time. Like this is in 2012. So her social entrepreneurship venture was to teach other Indonesian women how to develop website skills so that they could establish an e-commerce presence to bring in more money into their homes and into their villages. This was in
Wow,
2020. She's talking about e-commerce.
that's
And
awesome.
so we get to day 26 and I was so excited because I saw like her website mock up and I was like, "Are you ready?" And she said, "I I don't think I can do it. I don't think I'm good enough." And I was like, "What do you mean?" But what I learned, Sami, she's from a part of Indonesia where her ancestors were the slaves of that country.
Mm.
And so what I found was that, okay, so like we kind of talked about earlier, the oppressed communities, but even going deeper than that, enslaved ancestors still, right? The descendants of enslaved people still are very, very risk averse.
Yeah,
And so post traumatic slave syndrome is studying the Atlantic slave trade,
yeah.
what that meant for the US economy, but how that impacts how we make decisions. And so with spiritual wealth, the trauma, right, that has been generationally passed down
Mhm.
comes back to, well, I don't want to talk about that. So remember earlier I said, in minority families, we don't talk about death. We don't talk about money because both those things, death, it was happening so often in our families. We had literally no control over lynchings and
Mhm.
kidnapping, all of these things in black families were around the time of Reconstruction and Jim Crow. And so that pain, right? And that risk averse has been passed down. So spiritual wealth is probably going to be the hardest, the highest hurdle to
Right,
cross
to overcome. Yeah.
until there's healing. And
Mhm.
so that's why that's another difference between generational wealth and dynastic wealth is it requires the inner work that we don't always want to do, right?
Mhm.
It
Yeah.
requires healing. So that's a major barrier to building spiritual wealth within the family is you have to be brave enough to look
Mhm.
your pain and your trauma in the eye and respond to the world around you in a way that is healed, right? Like
Yeah.
your trauma response can't always show up.
Yeah. Wow.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah, totally. It's like again, I'm hearing you present it this way, with the whole uh yeah, the whole experience, right, of slavery and oppression, and being from the islands, right? I'm from Puerto Rico, where it was also carried out through all of the islands. We're even talking South America. You do find, right, black heritage all
Mhm.
across South America, South, and maybe not Argentina and Uruguay. It's too far down, But you
Mhm.
know what I'm talking about, right? So it's
Yes.
really deeply embedded into the DNA, the
Mhm.
psyche, right?
Mhm.
Of how we operate in the Americas, and how, or lack thereof, right? Or how
Yes.
we don't move,
Yes.
we get stuck because of this fear,
Mhm.
really, of,
Mhm.
yeah, of, and lack of confidence, and but it all comes from
Mhm.
these lived
Exactly.
experiences and oppression. And clearly the Black community more
Yes.
so, right,
Mhm.
than, than, for example, me, the light skinned Latina, right? You know what I'm saying?
Right.
So we need to be
Different
very,
ways.
we
Yeah.
have to be very, very aware of that, right? That there's that, yeah,
Yeah.
there's a lot to be dealt with, and a lot
Yes.
of these conversations have to happen also, so we can break down the silos between the different
Mhm.
communities too, and heal, and be able
Yes.
to in on each other, right?
Yeah.
Yes, in a way that is supportive, that comes from a place of love
Mhm.
and caring, and of being able to celebrate each other's successes. And so I am so, this is like, whoa, whoa, what a way, you know, to end this week, really. Because I have a whole bunch of notes. I gotta make sure I have these on Audible. I got two books now that I wanna read or listen to,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
Because it really helps that with that mind shift and
Mhm.
breaking down those barriers, right? And so
Mhm.
then as we can become spokespeople, or learn from each other. I just learned a whole bunch from you, right? So I just want to be better equipped to at least introduce,
Sure.
these concepts, and then say, okay, so if you need more information, just call
Yes.
Tanya, right? And, and
Yes.
she'll break it down for you
Definitely.
further. And I think this is just so important. I'm so thankful that we
Oh,
carved out this time. I can't wait to meet you next
I
week
know. I
when
know.
when you're in town. I'm so excited to meet you and have a deeper conversation. I'm glad that we carved out 2 hours,
Me
because
too.
the podcast is not the podcast is not enough. And now I also understand why when we're in these conversations, I'm so thankful that you show up, right, in this space that we're discussing these issues here in Central Florida,
Mhm.
because now I understand why. I'm
Yeah.
like, what is she thinking? And then when you drop a comment, I'm like, oh my God, there you go,
Thank
everybody. Did you hear that, or did you just read that? Because you sometimes put it in the,
Yeah.
I almost feel like you put the comments in the chat, so it's
Mhm.
documented, and because there's a difference in reading it too.
Mm.
And I'm like,
And
oh my God, did she just put that? Like when you talk about about the wealth,
yeah.
and about the interventions that need to be made, because now I get it. We had
Yeah.
this conversation now, and I'm like, okay, yeah, because she's been working on this for,
Mhm.
way over a decade. Yeah.
Thank
And
you.
and you
Yeah.
know and you know what it takes, and it's not easy work. And I agree with you. There's urgency.
Yes.
You said before, we can't wait. There's this sense of urgency because we're becoming the global majority, and we can't be on the underside of this with the shorter end of the stick. I just can't. We can't do this,
Right.
right?
Right.
And so I'm so thankful that you took this path, as a scholar, and to really understand this, because that's what we need. We need this blueprint. We need this roadmap. And
Mhm.
now we have these five buckets that we can are clearly defined, so we can then say, okay, I need to focus on this, on that, and it really does help. I'm sure you have a lot more to share. I'm gonna have to have you back on, right?
Oh,
So
thank
because I feel
you.
like with each one we can have like a whole, yeah,
Absolutely.
like a whole discussion about it. But I think that you're a wonderful, wonderful teacher.
Thank you.
I feel blessed. to have you in my life and to have met you. And I can't wait to see you and hug it out with you,
Oh, yay.
because I feel like when I meet people like you, I feel like there's promise, there's hope, and that we're gonna be okay, right? And I want to thank you for showing up and
Thank you.
speaking your mind and contributing to conversations that are being had at the city and county level here in Central Florida, because it makes a huge difference. So any parting words, any takeaways that you'd like to share?
Sammy, I want to say thank you to you because you are doing the work. I love the intro, right? Because you said these are people that give a bleep.
Right. Yeah, you basically give a shit. Yes, and you
Yeah.
do.
Yes. And so thank you for creating the platform because so many times you feel like if I say this, what's going to be the blowback? So thank you for creating the platform. Thank you.
Yeah. Oh, yes, totally. And we have to, and yeah, I think it was Nadia that mentioned in one of the last meetings, right, that it takes courage sometimes
Yes.
to speak about these things because you don't know how it might, there goes the risk,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
There might,
Exactly.
like, how could this maybe be detrimental? But if we don't know, there's a sense of urgency, so we need to do it now. And so thank you for being here. Thank you for sharing all of this information that I feel is extremely valuable, and I cannot wait to see you next week. So please drive safely,
I
okay?
will.
And I'll see
I
I'll
will.
see you next Friday. Sounds good?
Yes, sounds good. Looking forward to it.
Okay, take care. Bye bye.
Bye.
This concludes this episode of I Have Something to Say. We want to thank you for tuning in. Don't forget to tell your friends about us. We're on Spotify and iTunes as well. There's more to come next week. And remember, if you have something to say, it's time to speak up.